My name's Anissa Baksh, and this is my partner, Amanda DeLuca, and we're here interviewing Jared Eads, who's a veteran at USC Aiken. It is October 14th, 2019, and we're in the Ruth Patrick Science Education Center, and the time is 2:30 in the afternoon.
So Jared, we're going to start with your early life. When and where were you born?
I was actually born in Tampa, Florida. I wouldn't necessarily call that's where I'm from, just because I moved at the early age of 3 up here to South Carolina in Aiken. My parents got divorced, and my mom came up here to be near my sisters and my family within the Aiken area. And over the course of time of growing up between 3 and 18 years old, I found myself moving away from Aiken as well as coming back constantly, even to the point where I eventually joined the military and then came back to Aiken again to start school. So I can't seem to escape this place.
And when were you born?
1993 actually. So I'm 26 years old currently. Still going to school.
And your parents, what were their names and their occupations?
My mom's name is Karen Rose, and my dad's name is Barry Luttrell. Well, they're both Luttrell last names. My mom, she does real estate. She does flipping of houses. And my dad, he works with a company with tires distributors between overseas and as well as in the States. He's starting to get into a position where he's going to retire though, but he's still handling their financial stuff.
Okay.
So.
And how many siblings do you have?
I have a lot of siblings. 13 if we're counting half, full, step. As far as half, I have 3 sisters. Actually, as far as half, I have 4 sisters, 1 and 2 brothers. Full-blooded, I have 2 sisters. And then for my step, I have 3 brothers and 1 sister, actually.
What's the age range?
Whew. Very dynamic. The youngest right now is 25, which is my sister. I'm second. Actually, the youngest is my little brother, Dakota. He is 17. And then next would be my sister, she's 25. She's 1 year younger than me. We're like 10 months apart, so we're kind of, I forget what you call them. They're type of twins when you're within a year apart of each other. And then it goes all up to 43 years old, which is going to be my sister, Stacy. And she's actually a nurse up in Bamberg, South Carolina. So,
are there any other family members or significant people growing up?
As far as other significant family members we had a close family friend next door that kind of grew into the role of a godmother for me. Her name's May Carroll. She was very influential in part of my life, even from my early years of age 5. And her son, Keenan Fleming, he was also part of my life. We were kind of like brothers, essentially. And so I definitely count them as parts of my family, even my immediate. But they were definitely an active influence on my life. So.
Okay. And where did you go to high school?
So I went to a couple of different high schools. I went to South Aiken for a year, and then I did 2 years. I actually graduated a year early from Lexington High School. I was like 16, 17 years old at the time. I think I was 16, about to turn 17. And decided I wanted to go to college for biomedical engineering or nuclear engineering. And at the time, my mom was in the process of moving back here to Aiken. She was actually going through a divorce. And I was like the man of the house. And so, like I said, my 2 sisters one's a year younger than me, the other one's a year older than me. So we're all pretty close in age. So they still kind of needed a man of the house because I was literally going to go to Clemson for my degree, but I chose to go to USC Aiken to be near my sisters, help commute, drive them to school and such. So.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 2011, I believe, or 2010 actually. Yeah.
Okay. How come you graduated early?
I was a smart kid. I would say that only in the academic sense. I wasn't didn't took a lot of life experience, I guess, to catch up on the other end. But I just took a lot of classes over the summer. I really didn't have a lot of hobbies growing up. I was kind of a recluse in a sense. I just constantly just was with academics, reading, science, even coming here to the Ruth Patrick Center as a kid. Always had a love for knowledge. I find myself constantly reading and absorbing new things, even in the news articles day to day. I like to be pretty well informed in that. So.
That's good. Did you participate in any activities or any hobbies?
So, activities-wise, I tried sports. I did baseball, pony league, when I was in like 6th grade. Ended up breaking my hand. I was shortstop, and then I played football actually for 2 years in high school. Stopped playing that, and then I've always loved dancing, but I never really formally did it as far as taking lessons, other than actually a teacher I had in school, Mr. Burns. He actually owns Mr. Burns Dance Studio down here, not downtown, but on the other side of town. And he kind of got me into dancing and football because he took me to my first football game. He took me dancing and stuff like that. So I've always had a love for dancing and physical activity, I guess. So, but as far as dancing goes, like ballroom mostly, and then later on became hip hop. So.
Do you remember what your aspirations in high school were?
So in high school, I always saw myself doing something with either computers or something with like engineering. For me, I wrote actually a paper, two graduation papers. One was on stem cell research, and that was kind of really cool. It was a unique thing, especially almost a decade ago. It was really rather new. So it was kind of mind-boggling that you could just grow a culture of cells into something that could be an appendage for a human being to utilize, you know? But now it's also come into the question of where is an ethical statement as well. And then also I did a nuclear paper on nuclear engineering, and it's mainly nuclear reactions and stuff like that, and how like stuff what happens at SRS and how it generates power and energy and stuff like that. So that kind of sparked my interest. Later on, though, I found out, like, as I went to the military, part of the stuff I'll talk about, I guess, I found a love. I like troubleshooting things, like finding out, getting a problem, being presented it, and saying, "Oh, why is this happening?" and getting to the bottom of it, and then fixing it, and then preventing it from happening again. And that kind of is like the same type of problem-solving skill you use with computers and such. So later on, after the military, I would say now, which is why my degree is in computer science here at USC again. I have a love for computers, so.
That's all.
What did you do after you graduated from high school?
So after I graduated, like I said, I actually came down here to USC again. This was back in 2012, roughly. I did really well my first semester. Actually made straight A's. My second semester actually skipped all my exams. I was a smart kid, in my mom's words, but I was stupid lazy. But it really, I had a low point, honestly, at that point in my life, between a relationship, family, and my education. And one of the people I was close to, like I said previously, was this guy named Keenan. He was my next door neighbor, and his mom, May Carroll. They actually still live over here on Gregg Avenue, on Kingsport Way. But he reached out to me and noticed that I was going through some stuff, and he's like, "Hey, you know, I'm here for you." And we just met up. We talked one day just on the side of a curb on the street. And he was just saying, "Hey, this is what's been happening in my life." And he had joined the Air Force recently. He had been in for about a year. And he went through tech school and his BMT, basic military training. He'd been on his job for roughly 4 or 5 months at that point. And he was just sharing his experience. And I was just like, you know, I feel that really resonated with me, because as a guy who had predominantly most of his life 6 sisters within it, and then a mom who didn't really have an active dad or a role model or a father figure, I wanted that, you know? And Keenan was now in the military, so he's far away, so it's just like I wanted that sense of brotherhood or father figures or male role models to have in my life, and I felt like the military was the best way to do that. And it would allow me to get back on my feet and stand back up and mature me in ways that I knew I hadn't matured, because obviously I prioritized wrong in school. And so after that talk with him, I found myself in the recruiter's office the next day, and he gave me a math placement test and and other scores to take and ASVAB, and I ended up making a 98 on it, which is like this almost as high as you can make. And he's like, "Pick any job you want." So I picked a job, and I said, "I want to do air traffic control." And he's like, "I don't know if that's gonna be available. You have to wait." And I said, "I'll wait." And so I ended up waiting 6 months before I went to air traffic control, actually. So I did air traffic control actually for 2 years and 6 months roughly. Enough time to be acclimated, get to know the job, love it, and then also come to hate it. It's one of those things where the best way of explaining it is your mind's constantly plugged into a math problem, and you're constantly solving it, constantly solving it, and you just become so tired that when you get done and you plug out, which is what we call plugging out position, because you have like a little mic and you actually plug in, and that's what you use to talk to planes. And you would get home, right, and you get to your free time, and you wouldn't want to do anything. You wouldn't even want to watch TV. You wouldn't want to play video games. You wouldn't want to do any extracurricular activities. There was really nothing that you would want to do. You just wanted to just be by yourself, quiet, no music, nothing, and just sit there and lay down and go to sleep. So that was just taxing. But then it's also one of those jobs where you're constantly learning. You get tested every month, like an actual formally written test. So it was stressing to that extent too. And so at that point, I found myself at a crossroads. I was like, also struggling with the fact that I was told by my supervisor that if I was going to be staying within this career field, I can expect to be there for the rest of my enlistment. And for me, one of the reasons why I joined was to get out and explore, you know? And I didn't want to see myself locked into Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma, which is in the southwest portion of it, and near the Panhandle, around the border of Texas. And it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours from the nearest city. So I'm like, this is really what my whole enlistment's going to be here. And I mean, I was in a tower, which is kind of cool. So like, you're up really high, it's a beautiful view, but like, I wanted to actually deploy. I wanted to actually go overseas. I wanted to go do things, experience things. And then also at this point in time, I had a supervisor who had kept me in the gym. So I was getting really, really physically fit. So I was like, he was a previous combat controller and he was going back into it. So actually, I volunteered with him to do the buddy program, and we're going to both go in and be combat controllers. I actually ended up washing out that program due to the swimming portion. It was extremely hard. They do all kinds of stuff between buddy breathing, which is where you're underwater and you're exchanging breaths with your partner. You have to do that for like 5 minutes. And then there's also a swimming test where you get your hands zip tied behind your back and you have to swim like a dolphin essentially. And then just stuff like that. So it was really hard for me. I struggled with swimming. And so I ended up failing out. And at that point, it was during sequestration. So the military in general was downsizing during this time just because of what was happening in the economy as well. And so there was a new motto that kind of came out through the military across all the branches, not just the Air Force from which I was in, was do more with less. And so they wanted to, because so many people were getting out and they couldn't retain people and the funding wasn't what it was, career fields were restrict. So as far as moving into a new career field, which is something called cross-training at the time, which is what I would be choosing, and I only had 3 options. I could be a flight attendant, which wasn't my cup of tea, and I could be something called a command post, which they work 24/7 on site, but they're inside a building that has no windows, and you go through 3 entry control points and stuff like that, getting scanned, and so that wasn't really for me either. And then I saw something called weapons, and I was like, I read the job platform on it, and it basically stated that you'd be handling munitions, programming weapons programs and systems within aircraft and airframes and such. And I was like, that's really cool. And it's a unique experience. Not a lot of people get to say they've done that, And so it hopped out at me, and I chose it, and I went for it. And found myself getting trained now. In air traffic control school, I was actually training Keesler Air Force Base, which is in Mississippi. But then now I found myself training in Wichita Falls, Texas. It's called Shepherd Air Force Base, actually. And it's about 45 minutes. It's actually probably about an hour above Dallas. Went through tech school. It was about 3 months of training. Graduated top of my class. Got a base preference pick, and so I chose Las Vegas because I could choose anywhere in the state, so I chose Las Vegas. So I ended up going to Nellis Air Force Base, which is actually in Las Vegas. Once I went there, I got submitted to Tomahawks, which is a unit there within the 57th AMXS Squadron. And that whole squadron's responsibility is towards training the pilots of tomorrow. And that's not just in your F-16 airframe. It's going to be within your F-15s, your F-22s, your F-35s, all of your fighter jets. And Nellis Air Force Base is like the capital of fighter jets. So anybody who goes through any type of training within the Air Force as far as fighters, they're going to go to Nellis Air Force Base. And the unique thing about the mission there's also another squadron called the 757th AMXS. And they're responsible for your on the mission, on the go, your war planning, that stuff too. But also they kind of work together in unison So any war plan that happens downrange and overseas or anything that's happening, it's enacted there first in Nellisville, north of it in the test site. But even just among other branches as well as our coalitions of other nations. So like we have something called Red Flag, which is where we go up against all the best pilots from around the world. And they come there, they go there, and they have their teams, their maintenance teams, their weapons guys, their avionics guys, their crew chiefs. And as me being a weapons guy, I was representing the United States Air Force. And so we'd go up against them, and we would usually win. Israelis would win sometimes, though, too. They were pretty good. And then we had something also called Green Flag, which is basically a practice form of war, where we simulate working alongside other branches. Because, you have the Air Force, you have the Navy, the Coast Guard, Marines. And so we always are trained by ourselves. We go through our basic training, we go through our tech school training, and then we go through our combat training, But then when do we ever work alongside each other? There's none of that until you get down there. And so Green Flag was a way of blending that line and creating a way of us practicing and training together in unison and being able to have good teamwork alongside our other branches. So it was kind of a unique opportunity to do that as well.
Wow.
But yeah.
That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
We do want to back up a little bit and ask you some questions like about basic training.
Yeah.
About when you first enlisted.
Sure.
But when you made the decision to enlist, what was the reaction of your friends and family?
Almost immediately, no. A lot of my family members said I wouldn't be able to make it. Truthfully, my mom always supported me and my closest sisters, but most of my family were really shocked that I would even, because I was a little 118-pound kid. I had actually gained 10 pounds just to join the military, and so they didn't think I would make it through necessarily. And for me, it was a culture shock because you think, oh, you're in this naive mindset, whereas I am now, I'm seasoned, I understand what the military is about. But before, I'm like, I'm going off to war. I'm going to go this, I'm going to have a rifle in my hand, I'm thinking like it's going to be the day-to-day life, and you kind of go through and you think about what you see in movies and you kind of start enacting that in your head and like, this is what my day-to-day life is going to be like. And it's really, I wouldn't say it's even close to that in a sense. Once I joined in, it's really a lot of the career fields within the military, like if someone who works finance, they're doing the same thing as someone here who would work at a bank does, but they just have a uniform on day-to-day. Now there's definitely stricter requirements, stricter standards, and with that comes more additional duties, but it's really not like I was thinking in my head of like, oh, I'm going to go off to war, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to have a gun in my hand type of thing constantly. Even though I was air traffic control, I was still thinking like maybe it's a blend of both of those things, like I do this on the weekends, etc.
How old were you when you enlisted in the Air Force?
So I was actually 18 when I joined, and I signed up for a 6-year enlistment, and actually got out just in January 22nd of this year, and then went straight into college. Actually did something that's called terminal leave, and if you save up on leave days in the military, it's the same thing as vacation days within a civilian job. I had 60 days saved up, so I was able to use the last 60 days of my enlistment and transition into a civilian work environment or wherever I so choose. For me, I chose academics. That's why I'm back here at USC Aiken. So that's pretty much where I found myself.
And you said you wanted to enlist in the military because you wanted to, for why? Why?
It's because of the brotherhood thing. Correct my life, achieve something. I've always failed at things. I've always never really done something renowned in a sense and say, hey, what am I doing with my life? Almost like a midlife crisis, but a midlife crisis at 18. It's about
An early crisis.
Yeah, so an early crisis in a sense.
And you already explained why you chose the Air Force.
Yep.
And the reaction of your family and friends. Continue.
So, some of my friends I found out actually ended up joining after I did. So they're like, well, tell me how it is. And so I got in, and I started messaging them, like, hey, this is what's going on, this is how I'm doing. And then when I came back for my leave, and they saw that I had a car, they saw I had my own money, they saw these things, and they were all on their own issues in their life, and they were like, a lot of them just really upped and joined the military right after me, I found. So that was kind of interesting, but.
When and where were you inducted?
So, I did MEPS, which is like a military evaluation process, It's where they basically do physical fitness tests. They draw blood. They do vision tests. They also test your depth perception for your eyes. That's very important in air traffic control. Being able to see how far something is away from you and be able to perceive that and translate it into a verbal statement. And then also we had to carry like a weight, certain distance, stuff like that, and do a written test for IQ essentially. And after that, that was actually taking place at Fort Jackson here in South Carolina. Did that, took about a weekend, and then at the very end of that entire process, we swore in. We are all just moved into a room, given our oaths to read out aloud, and we all read our oaths, raised our right hand, and we were part of Uncle Sam at that point. You know, Uncle Sam owns your body, and I can't understand that actually. In my first year of the military, I got sunburned really bad, and I actually got in trouble for getting sunburned. And their stipulation was because Uncle Sam owns your body and you're harming your body.
Wow.
So for you to allow yourself to get sunburned, that's bad. So I was actually working weekend duty shifts for like 2 weekends because I let myself get sunburned. Never did that again. But yeah.
How did you feel when you were inducted, the whole process?
So when I got inducted, there was that shock of like, wow, I'm actually doing this. But it didn't hit me that earth-shattering like culture shock until I stepped off the bus in basic training. So I was on the bus and it was a long drive. It must have been a couple hours at least. And we got off the bus and all of a sudden this drill sergeant gets on with this mean mug and face and everything and his little hat down like this, like a sheriff. And it's intimidating, of course, because you're a young kid, you know, and there's this grown man just yelling at you from the get-go. He's like, get off the bus, get off the bus, get off the bus. So we're all rushing off the bus and we're all lined up in formation. And he's like, pick up your bag, set them down. Pick up your bag, set them down. Pick up your bag, set them down. We did that for an hour at
Wow.
3 a.m. in the morning. Just pick up our bags and set them down. Like, he's just trying to create that initial discipline. And he said, you guys look like a bunch of colorful rainbows because we all had it on different colors. He said, you guys are going to learn what it means to be uniform and look one color, you know, and bleed blue, which is what they say in the Air Force, you know, because that's our color is royal blue. And during basic, I actually was afforded my first leadership opportunity. I was called a guidon bearer. Essentially, we're the guys who hold the flag and we lead from the front in the flight. And I had like the biggest callus actually around my hand. And before that callus actually developed, I had blisters that went all down my hand holding this flag. And so you're holding it in formation, you have to hold it a certain way and walk in a certain way. And it's really, you're not used to that because you're learning how to march, but everyone's learns how to march. Well, I'm learning how to march and hold a flag at the same time and present it, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it was really rough at first because we walked 3 or 4 miles marching, not just walking, but marching every morning, then every night. And then we did Jody's running, and I had the flag too during that. So it was really taking some time to get used to because, like, if you mess up, everyone else messes up, you know, because it's just like a domino effect because it starts from the front. The people who are marching from the front set the pace for everyone behind them. So if I'm out of step, everyone's out of step. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I had to be on cue, attention to detail, discipline, and not mess up once. So I had to find myself after hours when everyone's asleep going and practicing by myself in the day room with the flag and just march around circles so I didn't mess it up so I didn't get yelled at. Because there was a couple of times in my first few weeks I got yelled at, like, for instance. So one of the commands would be like, call him half right, harch. And so, like, that's like a half turn, like a 45-degree turn. So I thought he said half right, even though he said half left. So he said half right. I started marching this way, and my entire flight started going this way. At one point, so I'm just being off for my own flight. And he's like, you mess up again, your ass is mine. But, so I messed up that one time. That was the last time I messed up, though. I made sure. It was bad. But he actually, that day, he took me out to the sand pits, which is where we would do a lot of our, you know, basic military training, combatives, that stuff, even just weapon training, crawling through the sand and whatnot. And he took me out there. We had just done our course, and so the sand pit was just destroyed. And he's like, I want you to take this shovel, and I want you to smooth out this entire sand pit. Wow. And so I went out there, and it took me a half a day, and I'm smoothing out the entire sand pit. And it's a big sand pit, probably about 2 of these rooms. And it gets towards the end, and it starts raining. And my MTI, my military training instructor, comes out and he's like, I hope you know you're not done. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're going to be doing it all over again. And I was like, well, and he's like, so I went to go like put my show up and go inside thinking, okay, I'm going to come back out here and finish later. He's like, no, you're going to keep doing it until it's done raining and then finish it once it's done. I was like, because like, so you're sitting there, you're smoothing the sand and it's raining, it's just messing up whatever you're doing currently. And he wanted me to be there, even though I know it's getting messing up. And I'm just going to continue smoothing the sand that's just getting destroyed. And it just became a mess and it started getting puddles in there. And, oh, it was a drag. But I did that for like, I think 14, 15 hours, just smoothing a sand pit that day.
Cool.
Yeah, so I never messed up my column half right again. But
Where did you do basic training?
it was actually, it was in Texas. Oh man, I forgot the name. San Antonio. It's called Lackland Air Force Base. And I started there on January 23rd. And I actually graduated basic, I believe, on April 14th, I believe. And then from basic, I translated immediately into my ATC school, which was in Keesler. And it was actually pretty hot for that time of year in Texas. I was expecting to be a little cooler because of South Carolina. Definitely not the case. And we're right in San Antonio, so it's super dry. So that took some time to get used to. Actually, you would sweat. You would go shower and then you walk outside and you automatically be sweating within a minute or two. So
You've already told us a couple things, but what was the hardest part of basic, would you say?
the hardest part for me in basic training would be, so in school you're an individual. You know, we go through civilians. We traditionally go through elementary school, we go through middle school, we go through high school, and we're taught this individualistic aspect of being our grades. You know, it's all self-derived. We study on our own, we practice on our own. We go into a test and we do it on our own, you know? And as someone who wasn't in traditional sports as much as other kids, which they would learn that teamwork aspect, I had to really drill it in that it's not just me, it's my whole team. Because I could get something right, but if my teammate fails, I failed. That one for all for one type of mentality. And to the point where you would be staying up after hours. Like this guy, he can't get his push-ups right, so he would stay up after hours after the cadre leaves. And you would be doing PT in the fitness room, the day room, and you got 4 a.m. You're coming up and you're gonna wake up and do fitness all over again. So we'd stay up for like 2 or 3 hours teaching guys how to do their sit-ups, their push-ups, you know, helping them get it better at it. And then when it came to like our clothing standards, like the way we rolled our shirts and using tweezers to make them perfect for inspection, you know, and using rubber bands and then taking them off and iron them. And so making sure everyone around you was good and not just yourself was good. And so that was really hard for me to stream because I was kind of an individualistic person. I wouldn't say I was selfish. I always had a heart to help people, but I just didn't understand, like, why am I getting punished because someone else can't get their stuff together, you know? And so it just became like, it was really earth-shattering to me because when I finally tackled a task within basic that I couldn't do my first time. And this was actually taking apart an M16 and putting it back together within a minute. And so I kept failing my first time. So it was towards the end of my training. And so it was the first time, because I've always been a leader, I was guidon bearer, I was able to give instruction. It was the first time the leader was failing, in a sense. And I had to have someone else come and help me and prevent them, because every time we messed up, we had to get on our ground, get on our faces, what they would call it, which is where you do push-ups, flutter kicks, sit-ups, stuff to that extent. And I was just the one failing. I was causing the whole team to fail. And I'm like, okay, now I know what it feels like when not everyone can always get stuff their first time, you know? And so it was kind of like this revelation that no one's perfect. No one's going to be able to do things. You know, you got to help out your guy next to you, you know? Even though it may seem like they're dumb or they can't get it right, there's going to come a time when you need them. And so once I understood that, it was changing, earth-shattering for me, you know? And really changed my outlook on not just within my team, but on the world itself, people I work with, co-workers, even just working within other units in conjunction with them, people I don't even see day to day, people I just meet for the first time, not judging them based off a certain circumstance, you know, and really just open up your world and thinking, okay, this person's having a bad day, you know, or this is why this happened. You don't just immediately think, oh, this person's this way because of this. You think, you try to go for a reason and say, hey, they're messing up because of this, or maybe they have something going on in their life today, you know, this type of thing, and not just immediately cutthroating and thinking this person is a certain way.
Were there any people that stood out to you in basic, or any people you got close to maybe?
Yes, it was actually my dorm chief. He elder gentleman. He was 35 years old, so he was definitely that older maturity kind of gentleman. He really taught me to think, so like trust but verify. So like I was in a position where I would tell someone to do something and I would go away, and I was like come back and it wouldn't be done the way it was supposed to be in a sense. So and then anytime that's happened in my career, it's always been detrimental to me and actually caused me issues later on, even to this day. And so trust but verify is like, yes, you need to trust somebody, but always go back and verify and redo it. And that's something that you should take in to any part of your life, even within your workplace. And for me, I found out it actually affected me. I became complacent at one point. And this is actually later in my military career when I was a weapons guy. So we had this thing called revetments. Revies is short term. And revetments is actually just what we call a revetment wall. It's just a blast wall. So if something were to explode, it would contain that explosion and prevent minimum casualties as well as damage to Air Force assets. And so in a weapon system on the F-16, there's these things called MAL-12 breaches. And they're part of a pylon that hangs actually from the wing, the airframe itself. And think of it as like two shotgun shells. And once they fire off from a weapons release button in the cockpit, little button you always see in all the movies, sends electrical pulse and then fires those carts, which are shotgun shells. When those shotgun shells explode, it actually sends gas pressure and releases the hooks which hold the munition and drop it. And so these cart retainers are obviously very dangerous because they're the ones that constitute between the munition dropping and not dropping. And so after every flight, you would go down and decart all the jets and take them out if they didn't fire. And even if they did fire, you would take them out and clean them. So this particular day, actually one last preface before I say this. Anytime you go to a jet, anytime you touch a jet, you're working on it just looking at it. You do something called safer maintenance, where you go through, you make sure everything's good on the jet, between its EPU unit, engine power unit, making sure that shaft flare pin is in. And these pins that are in are safing mechanisms, just like a circuit breaker is in your home. When it's flipped on, it allows power to flow through. When it's not, it breaks the circuit, so electricity can't flow through. And so you do this initial check, you make sure the jet's good, and then you perform your whatever you need to do on that jet. And so for me, I just arrived to a jet that was having issues, and they were actually just hang tanks on them because they're prepping for revetments, which is where we actually go drop live munitions. And so we went to this jet, took everything out of it, and we hung these pylons, and so we're ops checking them with equipment. And so I had the cockpit running and everything, and my boss's boss came out, and he's like, hey, we need to actually tow this jet to radar row, which is essentially a parking spot on the flight line where they do radar runs on the jet to test for its radar to make sure it's working. And so he's like, I want you to pack everything up and let avionics get this jet out of here. And I was like, okay. I was frustrated because I already had everything out and I was already an hour into this process. And I was like, whatever. And so I had already performed my safer maintenance, got everything ready. And so they took the jet and they towed it out to radar row. And it was only about a 15-minute ordeal. So I go back to the jet and I'm actually with my coworker, my wingman. And we actually worked in 3-man teams. You had something called a 1-man, a 2-man, and a 3-man. So the 1-man in weapons teams, they're actually responsible for relaying commands in charge, looking over stuff, as well as basically orchestrating the whole operation of loading ammunition to programming the jet, doing ops checks, anything of that sort. Everyone's responsible for everybody. And then you have a 2-man, which these are the guys who are holding all your tools, and they're like the ones going in there, the grunts, loading up the ammunition, locking everything down. And then you have a 3-man, which is traditionally they're on a vehicle, which is an MJ1. It's a jammer, essentially. It's a vehicle that holds larger pound munitions that are 500 pounds or higher. If it's lower than that, then you would lift those munitions in 3-man teams. Anyways, so I was out on the site, and I had my coworker with me, and he was a staff sergeant, and we both had the same mentality. When we approached the jet, we were both thinking we were finishing a job. And that's the wrong mentality to have. You should always treat it as you're starting from the very beginning, because we were complacent. We thought the jet was already safe because just 15 minutes ago it was safe. We took out the carts. What we didn't know at the time is that our expediter, he was trying to work ahead of time. Even though the jet wasn't going to fly for 48 hours, he was going to go ahead and cart it back up in between. So he told another weapons team behind us to go cart up that jet. So when we got there, we were just like, oh, we're not going to check those breaches because we thought, if there's no way, we're about to ops check them, no one's going to load carts in there. And they didn't write anything in the forms, and they didn't write anything in the electronic database stating that. So when we went to the jet, we were in, like I said, in the mindset of finishing the job. So I get in the cockpit, everything's running. He's like, go ahead, hit fire. So I fired, was good. Fired the next mission is good. And then you have something called emergency jettison release. And this basically, once you fire that button, it sends power to all your stations on the entire jet. And it drops everything. Hot cargo, not hot cargo. Anything that doesn't have a manual safety mechanism in it is getting dropped, period. And it's just a way for them to, if they need to be less weight to be more maneuverable and to dodge incoming missiles and stuff, they can drop certain munitions. Or let's say they have a hot missile but it's not firing, they can just drop it so it's not a hazard to them. Because if it's hot and it's still on your wing and it blows up, you know. So I pushed that button, and when I pushed that button, I felt the whole jet just sink about 6 inches, and I knew I had messed up. Luckily, though, it wasn't any munitions. It was fuel tanks. Like I said, we were hanging them. And we had the manual safes in, and so the whole jet sank 6 inches, and then I could smell gunpowder. And I was like, I did not just do this stupid mistake. The same mistake I've yelled at people in the past. And I talked to Sergeant Thompson, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to go check. And he's like, yep, it looks like they fired. I was like, no way. He's like, yeah. He's like, don't worry. He's like, it's not just on you. He's like, I didn't check it over here on my side either. Because I checked the left side of the wing. He checked the right wing. And we both skipped the same station. Because we were like, these were just hung. Why would someone put carts in them? You know? They still have to be ops checked. We just didn't know that someone behind us was trying to be more efficient. Which is fine. But we just didn't have the information. But still, it's on our fault. Because anytime you approach a jet, like I said, trust but verify. You know? Go back through it and look at everything, you know, from the start to finish, you know, and then pick up where you left off. And so that was something I really had to learn, was trust but verify, trust but verify. That was kind of a long spiel, but...
After you left boot camp, did you go for some more training somewhere?
Actually, I went to a couple of places. I went for Hell Week back to Lackland, and then went to Keesler Air Force Base back for combat control before I washed out, and then I also went to Keesler again for TERSA training, which is just basically teaching you about different terms of airspace and how to hand off between Delta, Bravo, Charlie, Alpha, and how it works in unison alongside center. So tower traditionally, typically, not in all cases, will handle between ground level of traffic all the way up to like 4,500 feet at the most of traffic level. And these are the guys that control your traffic that's departing from a runway or arriving on a runway. And then you have something called arrival, or radar. They are the ones who are handling transitioning between that airspace of about 4,500, 5,000 feet up to about 18 to 20,000 feet, roughly. It could be anywhere in between there. And so these guys are the ones who are handing off traffic between tower to them. And then center, which is these big, huge buildings. There's not very many across the United States. And they handle the top shelf of air traffic, which is from 20,000 feet all the way up to 60,000, 80,000, where classified stuff happens. But so it's just like a big top shelf, and then a small shelf, and then another small shelf. So I went to training up in Keesler and got training on that. Became a guy who could actually transition between tower and get dual rated, is what we called it, where you can be tower certified as well as certified in radar, which is really good because it makes you more marketable within the military. You can go to different bases or get more assignments, which is what I was trying to do at the time. Like I said before, I ended up cross-training. I was trying to make it so where I say, hey, I can do both jobs. You know, I can be a tower controller or I can be a radar controller. So that was why I was also trying to get tower trained there. And then I did Honor Guard. So Honor Guard, essentially, we're a specialized team that handles ceremonies to funerals, anything like that of that nature within the Air Force. Where there's a change of command ceremony, which is where we have a new commander of our entire installation or our unit, where we perform a ceremony, shooting of guns and then holding the flags, or presenting colors, or just marketing, or just, I guess, driving out to local areas within our jurisdiction. And typically when you do Honor Guard, you have a jurisdiction of about 500 miles around your base. And anyone who dies that was military affiliated and they request, we would go out and do funerals for them, from carrying the casket to presenting the flag, to anything of that nature. And there's different types of funerals you have to learn. You have to learn a retiree funeral versus just a veteran funeral, and what words you have to memorize, like on behalf of the President of the United States, I present this flag, that type of thing. That was actually a crazy experience for me too, because it really kind of humbles you and how fortunate and lucky you are as a civilian, because you don't get to see this up close day to day. You know, the people who sacrifice. And the first time I really got hit with that whole emotional aspect of it was we had a Marine who had died, and he had left his widow mom that was like 25 years old and 2 little boys that were 8 and 9 years old. And I was told to be NCOIC that day. And it was my first time doing it, and they're in charge of the entire operation. They're the guys who hand out the flag. And so it got down. We moved the casket, set it down, and I was in there folding the flag, rotating everything, and then presenting it. And after I went to go hand it off to the mom told me no, hand it off to the little boys. I was like, okay, so I got on a knee, I kneeled down, and I just remember these 2 little boys. They both had these collars on, and you know they were dry cleaned. But by the time I got to them, they were laid down flat because of how much they had cried and soaking wet tears. And so I'm just like looking at these kids, and they're just bawling, dry heaving, just crying so hard. And I'm like, please don't drop this flag that I'm handing off to them. And it's because like I went to hand off the flag, and he was about to drop it, so I had to make sure. So I grabbed the other little boy's hand and put it on top of the flag and got them to hold it, because they almost dropped it. But it was kind of like you see what's happening within American homes, and not just what you see day to day. Because yeah, I'm in the military, but I only see the military member that I work alongside within this environment. I don't see what he goes home to, what type of life he lives, the people he's a part of, who's important to him, the family, the children. And so that was kind of like a transition for me to be able to think, okay, there's more than just this guy that's attached to this person. You know, he's attached to his entire family and friends. And so you go to these funerals, and some of these funerals you would see 500 to 1,000 people attend. You're like, wow, this person made an impact, you know, for this many people to show up at their funeral. And so that was kind of a crazy experience for me. And then another installation, this is actually when I was overseas. I went to a unit, and this is actually our recent Operation Inherent Resolve. We were actually bombing Raqqa, which was like the last stronghold for ISIS. And once we bombed them, they were fleeing south to Syria. Well, before we bombed them, we actually had a unit from Alabama Guard, the Red Tails. They came up, F-16s. Well, they brought all their jets, they brought all their personnel, but they didn't bring any security guys to cover those assets, which is security forces. And so the Marines were low manned on security forces. They couldn't cover those assets and theirs. So they had to do something called augmentee training, which is basically teaching someone how to be a security forces guy. And so I volunteered to do that. And so I went through a 140-hour program of just learning how to pie rooms, to securing personnel, when to fire, when not to fire, wearing certain gear, being trained with certain weapons, certain protocols, briefings at posts, relaying information to our command units within those posts, and then patrol shifts, MRAP patrols, which are these giant tanks. They're actually pretty cool. It's really hard to get them stuck. You can actually manually inside the driver's side, you can actually set the tire pressure lower or higher. So like the flatter it is, the more it has a chance to climb out something. But my name was actually Shrek while I was there, because I managed to get an MRAP stuck in a swamp. But you wouldn't think there's like swamps in the desert, but there actually is. But it wasn't really a swamp; it was a retention pond area. But yeah, so. And then other training really was just my CADM firing, and then quals training I had to do every few years. CPR, we had to do that actively every year. Be trained as giving CPR to both children and adults, as well as training for self-aid buddy care, which is being able to administer, certain types of medications to your body. So I'll take care of some of the people, how to treat them for shock, splinting, tourniquets, which is where you cut off blood flow, so that type of thing, to prevent bleeding, stuff of that nature.
Okay. And now we're going to ask you a few specific questions about your service.
Okay.
So what units did you serve in exactly?
So my first unit was 97th OSS Operation Service Squadron for Altus Air Force Base. That was where I did air traffic control out of. And our mission there, it was mainly a global refueling point and also a refueling point within the States. And so, like I said, fighter jets or any type of jets really, they have to refuel while in flight because they just burnt their tanks so fast. They only can usually have about an hour and then an hour and a half if they have tanks on them. And so a lot of times they refuel them within the air. So we had something called heavy KC-135s, which is a type of airframe that has a boom on the back of it, or on the bottom of it rather, which dispenses fuel into jets while in flight so they can keep going with their mission. And it's actually now succeeded by the heavy KC-46, which is a new kind of cool system with computerized software. It's really neat. And then we also had something called a C-17s, where they just basically cargo freight planes that just transition loads and stuff like that. And then we also train load masters there to do combat offloads. So if they're like need a jet to fly over the desert and drop off supplies, they could do combat offloads low to ground or drop off vehicles and stuff of that nature. And then I was a part of 57th AMXS, and we're Tomahawks unit, like I said. We were training the pilots. We actually trained the best pilots in the world. Anytime of like operation sets off, they come to our pilots for advice. Even when stuff was sparking off of Korea, they told us to be ready to play at any moment because they wanted our pilots because they're the best. And that's not just for that one squadron on Nellis Air Force Base. It's every fighter squadron. They're all training the best of the best pilots. And while I was there, we would do twice a year. We could do something called revetments, like I said. We'd go practice driving live munitions. And then we could also deploy from that unit. I was one of the people that would actually deploy a lot from that unit. And then I found myself a lot of times, I was at Al Jaber Air Force Base in Kuwait. But then I got moved around a lot. I went out to Jordan a couple of times. And I actually went to UAE, which is like, it's not really a deployment. You're kind of just on base. It's nice. It's not really something I would call a deployment instance, whereas the other two bases I was at were mainly of I was serving an active component role. I was loading munitions on jets. I was prepping them. I was getting them ready. I would have them hot loaded where every jets had to be constantly loaded and refueled. So you have a jet that's armed up to the teeth and then it's constantly running, and you have guys come up there and fueling it up so in case something's about to happen, we're ready to go instantly, And then later I also found myself advising teams. So like we have special forces teams that would go into places and say, hey, we got this target, this mission. We need you. What do you recommend to use? So I would tell them what type of bomb, fuse, etc. What type of arming munitions to use for that target. And then it also came down to where I found myself elevated in a role and getting a higher security clearance where I would brief and debrief pilots based on their missions and stuff like that, and handle materials of classified nature and stuff like that. So it's kind of a cool experience, I guess, in that regard. But those are the main units that I was a part of.
Did you have a favorite unit?
Oddly enough, my favorite unit was also the unit that was the hardest for me, and I worked the hardest, which was Tomahawks. Actually, recently in ACC, which is Air Combat Command, it's just a MAGCOM, just a network of bases that are for this particular mission. Whereas you have AET, which is for training, so you have these particular bases that are responsible for training. And you could work as many hours as the military told you to. So I would work numerous hours between. It wasn't uncommon for me to work a 16 to 18 hour shift, and then go home and then come right back. And then sometimes there's even a couple of times where I worked a 23-hour shift. And so those points, you just go home. I didn't even go home. I would just go into the parking lot, go to sleep, and then I would come and shower because we have a shower in our unit. I would just shower there. And then the clothes that we wore for our day-to-day job duties was traditional, just like a maintenance uniform in a sense. And so I just wore my regular uniform on those days because obviously it wasn't washed, So I always had extra ones too. So there's a lot of times where I get off work, all right, I'm just going to fall asleep in the parking lot and I'll be right back here because you're just so tired, and plus driving back is just dangerous when you're that tired. Actually, I got in a wreck one time, but because I was just so tired and I was driving home. and it was bad. And actually, 6 other guys got in wrecks that same week from my unit because we were working so hard. And then 6 months later, ACC passed a clause, which was a year ago, where you can't work past 12 hours now. So that's nice.
Why was that your favorite unit?
So the best way to explain it is when you're working that long and you really don't have other outside friends, people around you and stuff like that. So a lot of other bases, you come in, you work your 8 to 12 hours, right? And then you go home. So you have an at-home life, right? You don't really get a time to bond, with the people around you. Whereas then you're so close to each other, you're all family. Every single person in your shop, things about them that probably their spouses don't even know, because you're just around each other 24/7. You live, breathe each other's air. And so you just grow in a way that traditionally other coworkers don't. And it's because you have to, because you have to learn to live with this person. It's like a marriage, because there's guys I've worked on site, like I hate some of their qualities, but you suck it up, deal with it, learn to live with each other. And so it's like a different kind of family love. It's almost higher than a family love in a sense. It's weird. But like I said, I liked it because the camaraderie there was different than any other place I had been in. People were always out there looking out for you, going above and beyond. And it wasn't so much just, hey, I'm coming in here to do my hours and I'm leaving, which there's some bases that are like that, sadly, where all they're looking to do is come into work and then come back out. And that's just not as healthy or as a happy an environment you could be in other places where people care about each other and be like, look, man, I know you got this going. I'll pick up your shift. You go ahead and go home, take care of this, do what you need to do. Or someone you look at and you see, man, this person's struggling. I just got done doing my job. Sure, I could go inside and and eat something really quick, but I'm going to go out and help this guy because when he gets done, and this is the thing, a lot of people don't understand. They think, oh, when I get done with what I'm doing, I'm going to go home. No, it's not like that in the military. Like I said, one for all for one. So, I don't understand why some people, it's just help out the person next to you because it helps you out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's really about that. And there was just a lot of that type of mentality within that unit. And then I also got to do something called an incentive flight, which is where you fly inside of F-16 or F-35. Or any type of fighter frame or any type of jet. And so that was kind of cool being inside one of those. I got afforded the opportunity. I got to handle live munitions day to day, whereas a lot of other units, they don't get to do that. They practice with inert munitions. That's scary though too. There was a couple scares. And then there was just such versatility on that unit. Traditionally you go to a base and there's only like one airframe, right? Whereas Nellis Air Force Base has F-16s, F-15s, F-35s, F-22s, UH-60s, B-1s, B-2s, and then you have all kinds of people from around the world, right? Installations, military units, coalition, or just within our own U.S. government military agencies that flying jets there. So you see every type of jet you could dream of on that flight line. It's almost like an active museum year-round, Just being on that flight line, looking around, you see different airframes, So that was kind of cool. So it was challenging in that regard. So you got to experience unique stuff on a day-to-day basis.